Hello. In this video, I will discuss the economic convergence of developing countries and so-called developed countries. So, according to the economic theory, uh, the economic convergence would suggest that the poorest economies would tend to grow faster rates than the rich economies, and there are several reasons why there would be this kind of possibilities for catching up. So first of all, in this kind of typical um, growth models such as Solow-Swan model, the growth is driven by the accumulation of physical capital, and therefore this kind of models would predict that when at the initially the level of physical capital per capita is very low, as in the poorest countries, then by capital investments, then this growth rate could be very high initially. But then eventually, when this capital starts to accumulate and reaches then sort of optimal level of uh, capital per worker, then this kind of steady state growth is reached, and that's why then according to this kind of basic growth models, then the poorest countries have great potential to catch up. And then, of course, if you think about the technologies, so then countries, the most advanced countries that are at the forefront of the technology, then of course for them it's more difficult to increase productivity because then you need to invest in research and development to innovate new technologies, whereas then the poorest countries can just replicate the established methods of the rich countries. So you don't need to actually spend a lot of resources to innovation. You can just adopt existing innovations. So that would also then help to then gain the advantage of the most richest economies. So based on the growth models, we would expect to see convergence of the GDP per capita between the richest and the poorest countries. But does it occur empirically then? That's then the question. So I took this kind of a diagram from a report established by Federal Reserve Bank of St. Louis, looking at this kind of convergence of different countries in terms of GDP per capita. And these data points are countries and observed in years 1960 to 1999. And based on just this kind of statistical correlation, so there is a linear regression line indicated with the broken red line. So there seems to be a positive association between the the level of GDP per capita and the growth rate of GDP per capita. So that would indicate that those that have relatively countries that have relatively high growth, high level of GDP per capita, uh, then are also growing in general faster than those poorest countries. So that would actually then suggest that there's not, at least in these decades from 1960s to the end of the millennium, there was not really any catching up, at least not in broader terms. So it seems that this kind of income gap between the richest countries and the poorest countries was actually growing rather than shrinking. And this kind of divergence between rich and the poor actually can also partly is reflected in this somewhat pessimistic view that I started the previous lesson from the Krugman et al. Textbook. But interestingly, also this study that I referred to here, then they also look at the situation in the current century, so from the year 2000 to the latest year 2019. So this is the similar way these dots in this diagram are countries, and there is again, horizontal axis is the relative GDP per capita, so the level of income per head, and then the vertical axis is the growth rate in the GDP per capita. So interestingly, now in the 21st century, the highest growth rates have been actually in this poorest countries. And now this kind of regression line, so this red broken line is downward sloping, indicating that in the past few decades there has been a negative association between the level of GDP per capita and the growth rate of GDP per capita. So that would then support actually this convergence hypothesis that that the poorest countries can be catching up the rich ones. So we did not see much catching up in the 20th century, or at least the end of the 20th century. But now, over the past few decades, this divergence has become more like convergence, as the economic theory would suggest. So this is good news for the growth models in economics in some sense. So if you think about this classification of what are the developed countries and developing countries, we also find that there have been actually a notable number of countries which have sort of graduated and become are nowadays classified as developed economies. So in practice, many of these are located in Asia and Eastern Europe. So there are these kind of Asian countries such as South Korea and also we can think of these kind of regions of Hong Kong and Taiwan that are at least the Chinese government considers to be part of China. And then there is many Eastern European countries such as Czech Republic, Slovakia, all the Baltic countries, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania. So that this also indicates that it's possible for countries to catch up and become classified as advanced economies, at least according to the IMF classification. And this is also then thanks to this kind of convergence that at least some countries have managed to catch up. So then another issue is that then there can be also that this the status of developing country. In some cases, of course, for example, United Nations or other organizations do this classification, such as IMF. But for example, if you think about the international trade, then for example, a WTO, the World Trade Organization, then allows countries to themselves to declare their status as developed. And for example, then countries such as the oil-producing countries, Kuwait or Qatar or the United Arab Emirates, at least by the GDP per capita and many other economic metrics, they could be classified as developed countries. But these countries are examples of nations that they themselves prefer to keep this developing country status because this allows them to get the preferential treatment at the WTO. So this also explains that how this kind of status of countries as developed or developing is somewhat questionable and dependent also on the context. So in the next lesson, I then come to the topical theme of the BRICS group of countries, which at least themselves that claim to then use the voice of the developing countries. See you then.